evening. Welcome. You are joining Lynn, me, the Wise Wife, and this is the Wise Wife Radio Show, episode number 3. I am so pleased to have you here today. We're going to have a great show. So the last several weeks, we've talked about so many good things. We have talked about men and women's role in marriage. We've talked about different problems. We've had folks calling in, and please know that if you are interested in calling in, you just dial 708-223-8923. 8953. I'm so sorry about that. Again, 708-223-8953. So as we go into episode number 3, I have a really interesting article that I want to share with you, and it's advice. I'm here to give you advice, but what's really cool about this advice is that it's solid advice and it's coming from men. This is great. Advice coming from men. So I am going to give you 10 pieces of advice from 10 different men. Some really good stuff here. So the first piece of advice is don't just be parents. It comes from a gentleman by the name of Nate, and he's been married for 27 years. And his advice is that his mother told him to never stop dating. His wife and they do movie nights, they take vacations, they also hold hands. And he mentions that he cooked while they were dating, and so he still does. He surprises her with flowers and cake, sends it to her office, and it makes him remember what he promised to do in the first place. He also wanted to be better than his parents and share with his children what it looks like to have a man who is committed and in love with the woman that he's married to. That's some awesome advice from Nate, don't you think? Drop in the comments if you have any conversation or any thoughts about the pieces of advice. The second piece of advice comes from Charles, who's been married for 17 years. And what he says is, no old garbage. He said that when he and his wife were doing premarital sessions, his rabbi gave him this advice, and he said it was no old garbage. So when there's an issue, they discuss it, they resolve it, and then they can never bring it up again. That's so huge. Because he said that it doesn't lead to marital bliss because there's never life without problems. But while it was challenging at first, the reason he found that advice to be among the best advice he's ever gotten is that it trains you to think about your relationship, not just in the moment, but also in the future. It makes him think, how can I make this better the next time? How can I be better right now? And we get a chance to move forward without being shackled to past mistakes and conflicts that are behind us. And I can tell you that I could have used that advice, because how many of you have had an argument? Perhaps, let's not call it an argument. Let's call it intense fellowship. So how many of you have been in intense fellowship with your spouse, and I'm intensely fellowshipping about issue B, but then, you know what? And as a matter of fact, issue A, that too, that's old garbage. Because if you talked about it and you resolved it, it should be in the past. So I thought that was really, really good advice from Charles. James, who's been married for 9 years, says to always kiss goodnight. And what he said was that in his first home, there were stickers all around the house, in the bedroom, and one of them said, always kiss each other goodnight. And he thought, that's cool, let's do it. So we always do that. Even if one of us is asleep, we give a kiss. And it forces us to still have a form of intimacy and connection in a physical way. We're not just roommates. How many of you have had that nightmare? Like, oh my God, these kids, my life, we're just roommates. We're no longer being husband and wife like we were in the beginning. And so perhaps taking some of James's advice and always kissing goodnight could be the first step towards keeping that connection with your spouse. Don in New York City uses this advice that came from a marriage counselor, and I thought this was great. He calls it the 5 and 5 check-in. So this 5 and 5, he employs it about every 2 weeks. And what it is that one of you talks about your feelings, what's going on with them, not with blame, just using I statements. And the other person has to listen without responding. So after that first 5 minutes, the listener feeds back what they heard, and the speaker either confirms that they got it right or corrects them. And so what it does is that it's a way to diffuse fights because it puts them in a place of having to listen non-judgmentally. It's also great to do this, not when you're having problems, but do it when you're doing really well and use it as a piece of maintenance. So we're going to pause right here because we have a caller. And so we're just going to take a quick second. Hi, caller. How are you?
Hi, this is Gina Cafano.
Hello, Gina. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Liz?
I'm doing great. So, folks, let me tell you about Gina. This is actually pulling us from an issue that occurred last week. We had a letter that came in from a gentleman who had been married for about 20 years. He was over 50, and his wife was also over 50. And what he found was that his wife, because of her menopause symptoms, was not interested in having sex. She was dealing with the stress of her job, and they hadn't had sex in a very long time. Now, his question was whether or not he should have an affair and not say anything about it, or, perhaps ask her for a hall pass. Those were his options. And while I answered that first question, which is no, that's a horrible idea, that's just going to create a world of problems, I did want to address it from the other side, and that is from his wife's side. She was not interested in having sex because of a change in her life. And so if you're over 50, this is absolutely for you. But for the folks that are listening that are under 50, this is really important for you as a woman to really be in contact with what is happening in your body, and don't necessarily have to wait. And maybe if you're under 50, you may also be going through something similar where you don't feel like having sex, and it could be associated with your medication. So I have Gina on the line who works with Green Circle Wellness, and Gina is a nurse practitioner. So she and the entire practice are dealing with women at all stages in their life. And so, Gina, I want to ask you, because you guys have what is called a functional medicine practice. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So Green Circle Wellness, we've been open for over 5 years now. And Dr. Pavlonis, she's a female doctor, double board endocrinologist who owns the practice. And we focus on functional medicine, which is kind of a fancy name for just getting to the source of the problem. So besides just menopausal or hormonal symptoms, it could be as simple as, the solution is actually that there is a bacteria in your gut and the stomach issues that you were having, in addition to some dysbiosis, to also then even causing hormone issues, all was because you had bacteria in your gut. So what made me fall in love with the practice is that I come from an ICU background, in the cardiac ICU. And I left that environment because I love the idea of getting to the source of the problem. I didn't like seeing people when they were so sick dying in the hospital, whether it was a genetic cause or actual, cause just of heart disease. I love the idea that, all of this could be, like 80% of this could be prevented. And that is what essentially functional medicine is.
That makes a lot of sense. So, folks, even if you're not struggling with menopausal symptoms, which is what led us to talking about Green Circle, you could, whatever problem you're having, high blood pressure, diabetes, all of these things that can strike people at any age, you can try the Band-Aid approach, because this is going to lead into what functional medicine is. Band-Aid approach is there's a symptom, right? And then what typically happens? You go to your doctor and they write a prescription for you. Problem solved? Maybe not. Maybe the problem isn't solved. And so, Gina, do you guys get people who have tried pills and they end up with you because they don't work? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I like the direction that you're going in this, and I want to just mention that functional medicine doesn't, especially green circle, doesn't mean that Western medicine is bad. That's kind of like the conversation we're having. Is that, yeah, it's kind of the system. It's the system that insurance companies only allow you to draw a certain amount of labs, and so with that, you get limited information. With limited information, it allows us to not prevent things because you only have a small picture of what the problem is. And we generalize a lot in Western medicine because we're actually focusing on serious diseases. So if you don't have a serious disease, we actually don't care about you. Whereas functional medicine is treating this portion of the population where it's like, well, maybe you're on the verge of disease and maybe actually you can save a lot of money and time if we invest in this population so we can prevent stuff from getting sick in the first place. But from a Western medicine standpoint and a functional medicine standpoint, we do have patients that have tried everything, have gone from doctors to doctors to doctors, who have gotten scripts and medicines and side effects from those medicines. And I just want to take note that, I don't think functional medicine is always the answer. I think what I like about Green Circle specifically is that Dr. Pavlonis is a double-boarded endocrinologist. Myself, I am a nurse practitioner. We have licenses that are in Western medicine, which means we practice in that side of things. So we're not afraid to prescribe. So Green Circle, we might also prescribe medication, but you're going to believe that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that you either don't need it or is there a useful medication out there that doesn't have as many side effects, and we were going to use something that has at least some of the side effects.
Yes, that makes sense. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. Western medicine, or what they call allopathic medicine, when you have your physician is an MD, is not evil. Because I am one of those people that believes if there is a medication that I can take, I will take it. I will absolutely take it. But when I was struggling at one time with irritable bowel, I did go to doctors, and there's only so much they could do. So I did have to seek additional opinions. And that's really what I found, even as I was going from my perimenopausal to my menopausal. Most people they just suffer. They just accept that this is horrible. I'm going to have hot flashes, maybe sweat dripping off my chin. I'm going to have sleep problems. And that's just the way it's supposed to be. And so
exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah. What I was just going to mention is because I get two extremes, and I like to play like the devil's advocate because I have patients that come in that are scared to get blood work, scared to even touch medicine. And it's, 2023, medicine shouldn't be feared, but there's, fear with blood work. There's fear with most things in life, but the best things in life is if you take a risk and you can find a provider that's trustworthy that is going to prescribe you medication that when it's actually truly, truly needed, and when it's not too far down the line where it's like you have no other option. Hopefully you have a good nurse practitioner that is checking your blood work regularly where she's educating about diet. But I think, there's a lot more that we can do. And I like that functional medicine is becoming more and more popular, and people are, looking more and more into preventive medicine. But now the problem I'm seeing now is that it's getting more and more expensive. So it's frustrating, but I think, people are interested, and the questions that are getting brought up, you can actually Google more functional medicine type alternatives, which, coming to 10 years ago, you couldn't. So there's a positive for sure.
Definitely. So folks, absolutely look up what functional medicine does. And if you are a woman over 50 and you are experiencing symptoms that are really making life miserable to you, what happens to a woman who may be visiting your practice, who is having debilitating menopausal symptoms? What would you guys take her through?
Well, first, I would hope that you came to us when you were having maybe perimenopausal issues, right? So I'm always thinking of preventative. I want to get to the start before the hormones decline. Because when you're talking about menopausal symptoms, The hormones have already declined. You're in the thick of it. And now I have to try to build your hormones up. Now, what were we taught when we were young when we went to the gynecologist? We were put on birth control. We always suppressed all of our hormones. It was always about suppressing. Now, I'm not anti-gynecologist either. Of course, we need to prevent, having babies and, safe sex. But the suppressing issue is kind of the same approach when you go to gynecologist. When you have menopausal symptoms, they're going to put you on synthetic hormones. In functional medicine, we're more about bioidentical hormones. There are hormones that are made that are bioidentical to our own, that are safer, less side effects. And what it does in our bodies, it can help us balance them. And so if you are coming to the clinic and you are menopausal, it might take us a little bit longer so we can balance your hormones. We do that typically with a saliva test, which our saliva test actually tests within the cell of the hormone. So we can actually dose appropriately for these such creams that are bioidentical creams, which we highly recommend for women. Men sometimes do really good with another form of hormone therapy called HRT, and that's more plant pellet-based, but creams can also work for men as well. It's really specific. It really depends. Each individual person, it really depends. But more importantly, we need to make sure liver is functioning good, our kidneys functioning good, is the patient eating healthy, because all these things play a huge role of how you metabolize hormones. So before we even put you on hormones, I need to get a full blood workup, and I need to see, hey, what's going on with your detoxification in your liver? How high is your cholesterol? Is it too high? Maybe we need to limit that and push a lot of micronutrients so we can get all the organs and the body systems working. And just from a heart disease standpoint, make sure that we address any deficiencies in general before I can even put you on a bioidentical hormone type cream to get you feeling just a little bit better. And that's when you're talking menopausal. Now, if you're married, perimenopausal, so you're just starting to get those symptoms, so I'd say maybe late 40s, early 50s, and ages are different for every single person. That's when I can start clean diet, get all these things, and just naturally by doing that from a vitamin standpoint, making sure liver is detox enough, making sure gut is absorbing the nutrients better, working on stress markers. Patients at that perimenopausal state actually can probably continue to maintain good hormone levels just by adding in some of those lifestyle type changes, right? And then right when we're ready, we can check on blood work what the FSH level is to determine, is this patient ready for hormone creams? Are they so deficient? So it's we can get and meet the client and the patient right at the right time and just balance hormones. Because what we see is that when hormones are too low, we have problems. When hormones are too high, we have problems. We want to balance. We want to keep everything on a homeostasis kind of level. And that's when you kind of feel like yourself again. And sometimes as women, in my personal journey is that, as a young girl being on birth control, I've got my hormones suppressed all this time. And then some women just continue to suppress after babies, birth control, and then it's menopause, and they never even got to build up their hormones. So sometimes it's such a beautiful thing to see someone come to us, married, perimenopausal or menopausal, get everything figured out, finally get on creams, and then they come to us and they're like, I feel like myself, but I've never felt like myself ever in my life, because it's their first time ever feeling a libido, which as women we need to celebrate. That's such a beautiful thing. That's a vital sign, So thank you for that question.
Yes, and what I heard so many things in it. One, that we can't wait until there's a problem. So, ladies, if you are feeling sluggish, no matter what your age, I really want you to get in front of it, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And when you're married, you have to pour to your children, to your husband. And if you are constantly exhausted or having problems with your eating is trash, all of these things are they're going to not make you feel good. And if you don't feel good, then you're not at your best self. So I heard Gina talking about getting in front of it before you start having problems, and whatever is going on in your body, just really being on top of it. I also heard that you're treating men. So I don't want to let the men, in your life, you could potentially go here as well, because the very same thing. We don't want your husband to not feel good and not feel his best self either. So we talked about a lot of things with regards to perimenopausal and menopausal, but what are some of the other things that you guys can do for patients at your clinic?
Well, just to comment on what you just mentioned about highlighting the men, it's funny that you say that because being a female-owned doctor that owns a practice, right when we started off, obviously, we kind of cater our marketing a little bit more towards women because we're all, mostly all women work there, and just women kind of follow women. But ironically, the beautiful thing about that is that once we get the wives to feel better, of course, the husbands come and they're like, I can't get my wife off of me. What's wrong with me? So as soon as we make the wife feel better, their husbands are like, I need to see what this is all about. So, it does go hand in hand, because this is a relationship podcast that, it's nice to have a partner try something out, try something different that's bettering themselves, and then see how well they're doing, and that partner being supportive of their partner just doing well. And so in reality, we probably now see a good mix of both men and women now, all just through word of mouth, but it really did originate from wives just feeling so great, and then their spouses just being like, how do I feel and look like her? Because she's been seeing you guys the last couple weeks, and now I need to keep up with her.
Absolutely. We want both of you to be your best self. So I have had a number of things. I've had vitamin therapy. I also went on a weight loss journey with the office and was able to meet my goals there as well. So this is really all about you and about putting you in your physical self first.
Yep.
So, folks, you can visit Gina and Dr. Pavlonis at Green Circle Wellness. If you are here in the Chicagoland area, they are located at 1141 West Madison, and there is a whole team of people, health coaches, nutritionists, and they can really help you. So I would certainly encourage you to look them up online, greencirclewellness.com, and you can also call their office at 312-877-5512. And please mention that you heard about them from the Wise Wife radio program. So, Gina, I so appreciate you calling in. You've given us a wealth of information. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you guys have a great night.
Okay, you take care.
Bye.
So, folks, if you're just joining us, we just had a nurse practitioner calling in to talk to us about taking care of your physical self, because you cannot be the wife that you want to be if you feel like trash. So if you've been talking about losing weight, if you've been really not happy with where you are in your physical state, please give Green Circle Wellness a call. So before that break, we were getting a really interesting article that was talking about men giving marital advice. And I was going to give you these 10 things. And we went through the first few. Don't just be parents. Please do other things. No old garbage. Once you have that argument, put it in the past. Don't bring it up again. Don't bring in old garbage. Always kiss goodnight. Keeping that physical connection between the two of you. And we were talking about this 5 and 5 check-in, doing this every couple of weeks, no matter what is happening, good times and bad times. Each partner gets 5 minutes to talk, and they're not blaming, but they're just talking, and use I statements. I feel, or I felt when this happened. Give 5 minutes, that person talks, and then the other person lets them know, did I get this right? This is what I heard. So that was a great, and that's a wonderful thing that you can incorporate even today. The fifth piece of advice comes from Brian. And Brian's been married for 24 years. And he said, have an order, is what he said. He said, I was going through dark times, and I read in the scripture that you should love your wife as Christ loved the church. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. And a light bulb came on for him. He realized that he was putting his job and his hobbies ahead of his wife. But when he put her first, everything else fell into place. He said, everything I do, she's on my mind. It's a sense of security. Our daughters see it too. We're being an example to our daughters. We show affection. And he says they even argue in front of them. Marriage ain't always perfect, but the goal is to find a man. The goal for them is to find a man who will love them like I love my mother. I'm sorry, like I love their mother. So I don't necessarily agree with arguing in front of the kids, but guess what? This man's been married 24 years, so something's working for him. So maybe you want to take some of Brian's advice. And then William, he says, keep the caulking in mind. Keep the caulking in mind. He said, my grandfather was a contractor, and he often tossed off wisdom in trade lingo. One of his favorite phrases about marriage and life in general was to keep the caulking in mind. So I laugh because caulking sounded crazy, but it was his way of saying to pay attention to the little things. It's the stuff that fills the cracks that helps bring the big stuff in and helps the big things stay in place. So keep the caulking in mind. He said he and my grandmother, they had a wonderful relationship. And it was because he always paid attention to her. He was holding her hand, making her tea in the morning, listening to her stories with a smile. He was always looking at the little things. And I will try to do that as well. Ian said, think of the team. Think of the team. He said, my father and uncles told me to never speak ill of your spouse with your family and friends. I talked about that in one of the past shows. Please do not dog your spouse out to your family or to your friends, especially when you two are not okay. According to Ian, he said most of the time, the family or friends will take your side and your spouse can't defend themselves. Plus, a problem could blow over quickly, but what you say to those family and friends is going to linger. It's a form of respect. Speak well of your spouse and side with them in public. Corrections should go on in private. I think that's great advice that Ian gives. Jerome, who has been married for 12 years, said, forget the attitude. He said, I gave this advice to myself after getting divorced. If you're living in close proximity with someone and there are no disagreements, then one of you is unnecessary. You'll have disagreements, and your ability to resolve conflict will determine whether your relationship will be successful. If you're going to do anything, eliminate sarcasm. Really hard for me. I'm so sarcastic sometimes. But it's already hard enough to communicate. So now the person, when you're sarcastic, has to read through what you're trying to say, and you're expecting them to connect the dots. So according to Jerome, he says to forget the attitude. Great advice. Keep it small. Keep it small is advice that comes from a gentleman who comes from a very large, very opinionated family. This is Jim. He said, my family, we talk every day, and it's easy to carry the weight of everyone's opinions into your decisions. But when I got married, my dad told me that it's my wife and my kids that need to come first. And it took a while to adapt to that new mindset, but it creates a lot of clarity. That could be a real important point for the folks out here if you come from a big family or a big circle of friends. But when I'm having a conversation with one other person, the only opinions that really matter are mine and my wife's. We are the most important people in our respective lives. You don't need to get opinions from anyone else, just yours and your spouse. I think that's great. And then the last piece of advice that is coming from Joffrey, he said that the grass is greener where you water it. I love that. He said, 4 years into my marriage, my wife and I were going through a tough time. And it wasn't a let's call a divorce lawyer kind of tough time, but it was, this is what a rough patch really feels like stage. So he went out for a beer with a friend and he was moaning about his relationship and getting all worked up. So there was this older guy sitting next to him at the bar. He looked over at me and he said, "The grass is greener where you water it." Then he got up. So that was that old guy at the bar kind of move. He said what he said, and then he left. But he said he must have gathered from my blathering that I was doing more complaining and not enough actual work. And so it's simple advice that I've kept in the back of my mind ever since, and I share that often. And that's actually what I said on the very first episode of The Wise Wife. The question is, do you want your marriage to be healed? Are you willing to do the work? And if you believe that, and if you follow that, absolutely, the grass will be greener, not over there, but where you water your grass, it will absolutely be greener. So I really like that advice. If there is any other advice that you want to drop into the chat, because there are going to be people listening to this at other times, I definitely want to hear that as well. So we've had a wonderful conversation today. We talked a lot about our physical health, and we went over some practical marital advice. So I want to make sure, too, that if you have some show ideas, please email me at lynn@lynnsharif.com. If you're interested in having more interaction with me, you can take a look at my website, lynnthewisewife.com. That's super easy. And if you're interested in advertising on my show, please send me an email at lynn@lynnsharif.com, and we will get a media kit out to you. So it has been a pleasure talking with you today. And if I see no comments, no questions, then I'm going to bid you a good night. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.